Once upon a time, there was a boy named Jack. Jack never really liked eating vegetables. Whenever he sat down for dinner and saw all the green things on his dinner plate, he just dreaded the idea of having to actually eat all that stuff. One night, when Jack was sitting at the dinner table, like usual, his mom put a plate of food in front of him, and on that plate he saw spinach and carrots and green beans. Seriously? Why did he always have to eat this stuff? What's wrong with just eating candy and cookies and ice cream for dinner? It seemed like all the best tasting food was the last thing he ever got to eat, if he got to eat it at all. Jack did not want to eat these leaves and plants that were sitting on his plate. Just the thought of having to chew and swallow those vegetables seemed like the worst thing in the world. And then Jack's dad walked into the room and saw what was sitting on Jack's plate. And he said to Jack's mom, "What did you just put on his plate? He's not supposed to eat those vegetables. Those will make him way too powerful. Do you really want to see what he's going to do if he eats all that spinach?" "Oh, I wouldn't worry about it," Jack's mom replied. "He doesn't look too interested in it anyway." And Jack thought to himself, "Huh? Did I just hear them right? What will happen if I eat that spinach? Maybe there's a reason why it doesn't taste so good after all. Well, I guess there's only one way to find out." And so Jack reached down and grabbed every piece of spinach on his plate and started shoveling it into his mouth. He closed his eyes and did his best to ignore the taste as he chewed and chewed. And then Jack's dad turned his head and said, "Chelsea? Chelsea? He's eating the spinach! I told you not to let him eat it!" Jack's mom turned her head to see what was happening, and she froze. And she looked at Jack with wide eyes. Neither of them thought Jack would actually do it, but it was too late. Jack had swallowed the last bite of spinach, and the transformation was already taking place. Jack's tiny little arms started to grow bigger and bigger with rock-solid muscles until they were so big they started to rip the sleeves of his shirt. And when his arms finally stopped growing, Jack's dad said, "Great job at eating your spinach, Jack. Nice job there, buddy. Want to give me a high five?" And he held out his hand for Jack, and Jack quickly swung his hand and slapped his dad's hand the way he usually did, and Jack's dad went flying across the room. He crashed through the window as broken glass flew everywhere, and he landed somewhere out in their front yard. Jack's mom was in shock as Jack's dad came running to the front door just a moment later. And as he walked back in, he couldn't tell Jack what to do anymore because Jack was a lot stronger than his dad was now. And so Jack's dad nervously spoke up and said, "Hey, Jack, old buddy, old pal. So I think maybe we've had enough vegetables for today, don't you? Why don't we, put the rest of that stuff away and don't worry about having any more. You've already had plenty. All right? Nice job, buddy." And Jack looked down and saw the beans and the carrots still left on his plate. "What happens if I eat these carrots, Dad?" "Oh, nothing at all," Jack's dad said nervously as he quickly shot a glance over at Jack's mom. Jack's mom said, "Oh yeah, they're really pretty bland, Jack. I'm sure you wouldn't like them. I'm not sure why I even put those on your plate. Here, let me just quickly take those away." And as she reached down to grab Jack's plate, Jack quickly snatched the carrots from his plate and stuffed them into his mouth and started chewing. Both parents looked at each other with horrified looks on their faces. They both knew that the carrots would give Jack very powerful eyes. And that's exactly what happened next. Jack's eyes became so powerful, he could see right through the walls. Jack looked around and saw into all the rooms of his house. He could even see across the yard and into the houses of his neighbors. He could see right through anything. Jack couldn't believe it. All these years of complaining about vegetables on his plate and refusing to eat them at each meal, and he had no idea what he had been missing out on all this time. Jack's dad spoke up and said, "So, Jack, I kind of think maybe we've developed enough superpowers for one day, don't you? Let's wrap this up and get you ready for bed." And Jack looked down and saw there was one vegetable left on his plate. It was the small pile of beans. Now, Jack really did not like beans, but he couldn't deny there were some pretty amazing things happening by eating these vegetables that he never even thought he liked. And the funny thing was, after trying them, the spinach and the carrots actually weren't as bad as he thought they were. I mean, maybe these beans would be halfway decent too. So when Jack's parents saw him reach down with a fork to stab the beans and bring them up to his mouth, they both knew everything was about to change. They both dropped what they were doing and started running across the room towards Jack, desperate to stop him before he ate those beans. Both of them ran and jumped across the room, but it was no use. Jack had already put every last bean into his mouth, and by the time his parents landed right next to him, they could hear him swallow. And they both yelled, "No!" And with that, Jack started to float off of his chair and hover around the room. He was flying! When Jack realized what was happening, he started to float higher and higher towards the ceiling, and then he flew down towards the window and floated right outside. He flew all around his house, and then he started to fly high above the trees until he could see for miles in every direction. He could see the entire city where he lived from way up here. And then when he looked back down at his house, he could see his parents and sister and dogs who were all standing outside the house looking straight up at him. And they were just tiny little specks on the ground from way up where he was. But then, as he started flying closer down to his house, he could just barely make out something his mom was trying to say. "Don't you want your dessert, Jack?" "What, Mom?" Jack asked. "What'd you say?" "I said, don't you want your dessert, Jack?" And as Jack flew lower, he could see that his mom was holding something in her hand. It was his plate, and there was some dessert sitting on it. With all the excitement, Jack had forgotten all about eating his dessert. That was the best part. So Jack flew back down with his giant muscles and his X-ray vision, and he sat back down in his chair, and then he gobbled down his cake and his ice cream. And just like he remembered, it tasted so good. And as soon as he was finished, he hopped off his chair and jumped up in the air to fly away, but he just fell back to the floor. And then he noticed he couldn't see through the walls anymore. And when he looked down and tried to flex his huge muscles, all he saw were his two little kid arms again. He lost all his superpowers when he ate that yummy dessert. Oh, man! Jack's dad said, "Well, I guess we'll have to give you one vegetable at a time until we can figure out how to manage all these superpowers of yours, huh?" And his dad started clearing off the table and doing the dishes. And for some reason, Jack had a feeling he wasn't going to mind eating his vegetables at dinner the next night. Do you ever find yourself wondering when the next episode is going to come out for the Storyland podcast? I know they don't come out as much as we all want them to, but if you want to be the first to know about when the next story is going to drop, all you got to do is follow us on Instagram or Facebook, or just go to storyland.show, and you'll find links to all the different places online where you can listen and watch, and even leave a comment and make suggestions about other story ideas that you might have. Just go to storyland.show, or again, you can follow us on Facebook or Instagram. Just search for Storyland, all one word, podcast. Storyland Podcast, and you should be able to find us there. Thanks again for listening, and I'll talk to you next time.